Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. I had a chance to greet a few of you in the room already. Just wishing you a great day, those of you who are moms here this morning and online as well. Well, this morning, as I talk about moms, I do realize, so I'm just going to put this out there right at the start so I don't have to keep apologizing for it as I talk, but I do realize that there are dads and grandparents and foster parents, teachers, other community support systems, people who fill the roles of a lot of these things that moms do. So just roll with it. I'm probably going to talk a lot about moms, but I know that there are many others who do these things. One of my favorite quotes that I saw recently, can you read that? Silence is golden. Unless you have kids, then silence is just suspicious. If you know, then you get it. So yes, although I am going to use a lot of examples this morning about moms, I do hope that most of you will be able to relate to some aspect of what I have to say, because I do think that God has something that each of us wants to hear. So forgive me in advance if you're thinking, dads do that too, grandparents do that too. I know. Well, when Michael asked if I'd give the sermon this morning, I was thinking and praying, what am I going to talk about? And I landed on this idea of sharing from Esther. And I thought, oh yes, Esther, that's been on my mind a lot lately, because recently I had the privilege of working through the book of Esther along with the other leaders in our new GEMS program. So GEMS is a bi-weekly Friday group for girls, and we learned about this strong, courageous heroine in this book, and lots of interesting facts and how God is our king. And so I thought, yes, that must be why this is on my mind. So if you've never read the book of Esther, you should. It's just a short read in the Old Testament. And it really is like if you just read it straight through, which wouldn't take you long, it's like reading a really great, gripping, fictional novel. There's a villain and a hero. There's ironic twists in the story. But it isn't fiction at all, which makes it all the more fascinating. They've made several movies about it, but I cannot recommend them. I'd have never seen them, except the VeggieTales one. The Bible version, the actual version as you read it in the Bible, is not PG. But the VeggieTales is great for all audiences and very entertaining. But let me summarize as though I was giving you a movie synopsis of the book of Esther. The book of Esther in the Old Testament tells the story of a Jewish girl named Esther who becomes queen of Persia. The plot revolves around a conspiracy to annihilate the Jewish people, which is orchestrated by the king's advisor, Haman. He's the bad guy. Esther's cousin, Mordecai, learns of the plot, and he urges Esther to use her position as queen to intercede with the king on behalf of all Jewish people. Esther risks her life by approaching the king without being summoned, because that is punishable by death. And she invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Now, at the banquet, Esther reveals her Jewish identity. The king didn't even know that his own queen was Jewish. And she's able to expose Haman's scheme to kill all of the Jews. And then in a dramatic turn of events, the king orders Haman to be executed instead. And he grants the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies. And the Jewish people emerge victorious. So Esther, this courageous woman, she puts her life in danger. She risks getting executed to try and save the Jewish people, her people, God's people. That's a great theme to preach on Mother's Day, right? Women, you are courageous like Esther. Esther was chosen to be the queen of Persia. The king, Xerxes, doesn't even know she's Jewish. The Jews are facing their certain death. The plot to kill the Jews was discovered by Mordecai, her cousin. Esther could have taken a chance that the king wouldn't find out that she is Jewish and that maybe she wouldn't get killed along with the others. But instead, she risked her life to save her people. As she's contemplating what to do, how to try to save her people, knowing her whole life is at stake here, she says to her cousin Mordecai, "All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king hasn't called me to come to him for 30 days. Well, go gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same, and then, though it is against the law, I will go. I will go and see the king. And if I must die, I must die." Well, Esther bravely goes, totally illegal against the rules at that time. She goes before King Xerxes, and she cleverly figures out a way to save her people. What a courageous woman. That could be a great message for today. How to be a courageous woman like Esther, like a mama bear protecting her cubs. Esther risked her life and protected the Jewish people. A woman who risked death to save others. A woman against all odds saves the entire population of Jewish people living in Persia because of her bravery and courageous spirit. All women, all people can learn a lot from her selfless acts. In fact, God has called all of us to be courageous. It's written in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. "So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic before them, for the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you." Moms, women, and men, be courageous, knowing God is with you. A quote from Buddy Hackett. "My mom's menu consisted of 2 choices, take it or leave it." Even when you have to stand firm against your 2-year-old and explain again that their diet must consist of more than goldfish, ketchup, and string cheese, be courageous. Moms, women, and men, be courageous knowing God is with you as you feed your toddler food and hope they don't throw it on the floor. Even when your son grows taller than you and you have to look up at him and wave your finger and say, "You can't borrow the car until your homework is done." Be courageous knowing that God is with you, even when you disrupt the plans of a teenage boy who towers over you. Women, be courageous like Esther. But as it turns out, as I was preparing to write for today, that isn't what we're going to focus on after all. It's a good message, but not for today. The book of Esther is one of only 2 books of the Bible named after women, the other being Ruth. That's significant. What can we learn from this important female biblical figure on Mother's Day today? Esther, this woman in the Bible, is a woman who had been exiled and orphaned. Now, at that time, that makes someone very disadvantaged. The Jewish people were scattered around Persia. They were no longer living as slaves, but if they didn't return to Jerusalem, they were just kind of living as outsiders in the land. They were very far from the temple in Jerusalem, where their own people would have been used to going for worship. They were living among the Persians, who didn't worship God. They were forced to bow down to Haman, King Xerxes' court official, and observed some very immoral ways of living. A woman, powerless, treated like property. The women were gathered up and forced to compete to become the next queen of Persia after the former queen, Vashti, was cast out of the palace. It says, but after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree that he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. And after that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. This man had a beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. Esther was kidnapped. She was sexually exploited, along with many other young women. Also, King Xerxes could find himself a new queen. Esther pleased the king, so he decided she would be the next queen. What kind of hero is this? Wow, this woman, she's disadvantaged, she's powerless, she's imperfect, she's got a lot of going against her, and she saves the entire population of the Jews living in Persia because God had a plan for her. And Esther's cousin, Mordecai, I think he knew this when he said to her, who knows if perhaps you were made queen just for this, for just such a time as this. And God does use imperfect women and men like Esther, like me, like you, to fulfill his plans. God doesn't have plans only for the advantaged, only for the powerful, only for the perfect. God has a plan for every person. Very well-known verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Would this be a good reminder on Mother's Day today? Moms, God didn't require you to come from high status and a powerful family heritage to be perfect in all ways in order to be the parent I called you to be. Maybe God planned for you to be just who you are, just where you are, imperfect as you may feel, to raise the child that he has given you. That could be a good Mother's Day message. I've definitely felt like an imperfect parent. I will make the assumption I am not alone. Parenting is hard. I'm sure if you've tried it, it's difficult. I looked it up and I became a parent 6,860 days ago. That's when I became a parent. And I have certainly wondered if I was worthy of that calling at different times. I came from divorced parents. I became a divorced parent to my own children. I remarried. We became a blended family. I'm not perfect. Parenting's hard work. It's complicated. Am I really going to make it through this? When my kids were little, those of you with young kids, you're worrying about if they're eating the right food, did they sleep enough? As they get older, am I teaching them some good habits? Have they learned how to do chores? Am I finding the right balance between being fun, but also instilling some routine? They get a little older, you're worrying suddenly, oh, did I teach them how to wash themselves? Are they doing anything in the shower? Do they brush their teeth properly? Is it for 2 minutes? Do they clip their toenails? You start wondering, did I teach them all of that stuff? Then you move into questioning, kind of as for the teen, am I doing anything right when they're a teen? Anything at all. It doesn't matter what you text, you get back, Kate. It's not even an appropriate answer to the question you asked. Are you going to be home for supper, Kate? Not my kids, though, no. Then you start wondering why God trusted you to parent teenagers. Here, my kids aren't into adulthood fully yet, but my mom says you never stop worrying about them. They're always your children, so it really never ends. You take your kids to church. You're trying to demonstrate from your own life to show them a good example of what it means to be loving God, following God, loving Jesus. You start questioning, am I discipling them right? Am I doing what God wants me to do? Do I pray with them enough? Do I pray for them enough? Am I really doing all I can to ensure they too will love Jesus? But again, we could ask ourselves similar questions really in any area of life. God, why am I at my job? God, why did you call me to live here in Truro? God, I mess up on a regular basis. Are you sure you have a plan for my life? Yes, God would say, I do have a plan for each of you. To be a parent, to have that job, to be sitting in this church today in Truro. Perhaps you are here for such a time as this. Moms, even when your kids are giving you trouble, God has called you to be in that relationship. When your kids are still leaving wet towels on the floor or they walk right out of their shoes in the doorway, you are called to be in that relationship. Mark Twain wrote, "My mother had a great deal of trouble with me, but I think she enjoyed it." I wonder if he was a parent at that point. So that would be a good message for today. You don't have to be advantaged and powerful or perfect. God called you for such a time as this. He has a plan for you. He has placed you right where he needs you to be for this time. Just as Esther, against all odds, as imperfect as the situation was, as imperfect as she may be, she saved the Jewish people because God placed her right where he needed her. But that's not what we're going to focus on today. A peculiar thing about the book of Esther, it's very unique to this book alone. There are 66 books in the Bible, and unique to this book alone, is that the name of God is never mentioned in this book. And it does make some people wonder, why is it included in the Bible? Isn't the Bible a book about God? Well, although he's not mentioned, the author is using this as a technique, making a profound point for us to focus on God's providence at work in everything to save the people. Providence is the protective care of God over his people. And when we look at the book and we read it and we think, how peculiar, God isn't even named in here. And we wonder to ourselves, why is it even in the Bible? It forces us to zone in even closer and realize that he is overseeing everything. The book of Esther is almost entirely characterized by divine providence, the protective care of God over his people. God isn't named in the book as having done anything. But all these critical parts of the story work together for a particular outcome. The Jewish people are spared. Someone might read the book of Esther and think, gee, there's a lot of crazy coincidences that prevent the death of the Jews. We sometimes look at life and think, geez, those are some crazy coincidences that got me to this good place in life. So you could read the book and think, yeah, the Jews were spared. What a great series of coincidences. Others might call those, you may have heard this term, not coincidences, but Godcidences. Have you heard that? It's actually like in the, whatever that modern dictionary is. Godcidences. They're surprising events that appear to be random or unconnected or simply coincidence, but in reality, God is behind the scenes working things out for good. Or you can simply call it divine providence. Now, if you have read the book of Esther, this will make a little bit more sense, but quickly, here are the amazing things that we know God worked out because of his providence. He worked these things out, these critical details behind the scenes so that his people were spared. Things like Esther was the one chosen to be queen of Persia. It had to be her. He chose her to be queen of Persia. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, overheard a plot to kill the king. And this eventually put him in good favor with the king because he was able to save the king's life. When the decree was made to kill all of the Jewish people, a date was picked for that to be carried out, but the date was left up to chance. Chance? Coincidence? Nah. Godcidence. It was by casting a lot, random, it would seem, a date was picked when this would be carried out, and it was months away, giving Esther time to approach the king and save her people. When Esther, full of courage and bravery, decided to go before the king, knowing if he hadn't summoned her, he could have her put to death, he didn't. He chose not to have her killed. God was working out all of those critical details. You could read those events and think they were just coincidence, but that's not what the author of Esther wants you to do. Without God's name being mentioned, we can really take notice that he is working behind the scenes to line up everything for good. And it turns out good indeed for the Jewish people. They have a celebration just because of these events. Esther 9 says, Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to the Jews near and far throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes, calling on them to celebrate an annual festival on these 2 days. He told them to celebrate these days with feasting and gladness, and by giving gifts of food to each other and presents to the poor. This would commemorate a time when the Jews gained relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into gladness, and their mourning into joy. So is God working behind the scenes in your life? Have there been times of sorrow that were turned to joy? Don't chalk it up to coincidence. Or can you see the evidence, if you really look, God's divine providence working out the critical details for that good outcome? You know who else often works behind the scenes and doesn't always get the full credit they deserve? Moms, yes. And dads too. As I said, I'm not going to apologize every time I focus on moms today. I know dads and grandparents and many others do these things too. One of the behind the scene things that I have realized is so time consuming. Anybody else rotate all of the clothes and shoes and toys as kids get grown out of those things? That takes time. Is this keep for the next kid? Is it worn out and garbage? Is it good enough to give away? That is a time-consuming and thankless task. Being aware of the closest bathroom at any given moment. Maybe you're at the soccer field and it's not one of those fields that have a patch of trees nearby for your kid to go pee in, and you have to know how long it takes to zip over to the Sobeys bathroom before you can get back and they have to play more soccer. You have to know where the closest bathroom is at any given moment. Maybe having that secret stash of items, little gifts, birthday cards, in case your kid comes home, they forgot to tell you a week ago that they got invited to a birthday party and it's this afternoon. And you're like, I have no time to go shopping, but thankfully I have a secret stash of presents and birthday cards. You have to have that at the ready. Having snacks for the hangry kids in your family. Hangry, hungry and angry. When they get hungry, they get angry, and you want to avoid hangry kids. So you have to have pockets and purses full of snacks. You may often make the appointments. Doctors, dentists, optometrists, parent-teacher. There's lots of appointments that kids need. What about this one? Knowing the exact location of every item in your house at all times. You might get a call, you're not even in the house and you get a call. Where is that really tiny little item that I absolutely need right now and I haven't seen it in a month? And you're able to describe to the millimeter where to go find it in that weird junk drawer, and it's, in the back to the right, behind the Scotch tape, whatever. Moms do a lot of secret things behind the scenes that may go unnoticed. Here's a funny quote. Becoming a mom to me means you have accepted that for the next 16 years of your life, you will have a sticky purse. Because not only do they need that snack, they may not finish that snack, and then that snack needs to be carried somewhere in your purse. Absolutely. Moms deserve credit for all those behind-the-scene things. And it's not a coincidence. If kids are well-behaved at a restaurant, it just means that they have a mom who perfected the stare. If you see a kid very well-behaved in public, they have a mom who knows how to do the stare. Yeah, she means business. So let's give her credit. Give credit where credit is due. It's not a coincidence that all in one day, multiple kids were driven to various activities in different areas of town, and not one of them was late. They just have one of those moms who drank 10 cups of coffee before 8 a.m. and sacrificed her own to-do list to make sure her kids got where they needed to be. So let's give credit where credit is due. It's not a coincidence that kids potty train, right? That's hard work. There's blood, sweat, and tears that go into potty training. It's not a coincidence that kids learn how to do their own laundry, or how to cook for themselves, or attain their first part-time job and are so proud. That's the job of moms and dads and grandparents. I know. But let's give credit where credit is due. And again, I know it's, as I said, more than just moms, but more so, God deserves the glory for his behind-the-scenes things. You didn't get where you are because of random coincidence. It was the loving overseeing of a parent, God. And he was looking out for you, his child. So this Mother's Day, we can take a moment and we can be encouraged as we look at the book of Esther. And yes, this is my actual point today. We can be encouraged that, yes, we can be courageous, as Esther was, especially knowing that God is always with us when we face difficulty. We can be assured that even though we may feel disadvantaged or powerless or imperfect, God has a plan for our lives and wants to use us to fulfill his will. But even more, we should remember that God is always at work. He isn't absent. We aren't just experiencing a series of coincidences. Some of his work is behind the scenes, but he's always at work. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. and I'll finish up by reading Romans 8:28, also a great verse if you know it. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So I've asked if we would sing Waymaker, which says, even though I don't see it, you're working. We're saying those words to God. We know that he never, ever stops working.